In module number 2, we're going to be discussing power steering pump warranty analysis. Basically, what we have found with power steering pumps that have been returned for warranty. What was the failure? What caused the issue of the failure? Again, was it a product problem, installation problem, some field issues, some things like that. But again, power steering pump warranty analysis. So with that, we're going to find out that at the end of this module, you understand the typical power steering pump warranty analysis issues. These are some of the things that we see when doing extensive analysis of returned power steering pumps. Now, typical warranty issues include improper pulley removal and installation, reusing the old O-rings, failure to flush the system with power steering fluid prior to pump or gear replacement, the presence of brake fluid, brake clean, carb cleaner, transmission fluid, or aftermarket flush agents in our power steering system. Also, not using the correct OE recommended power steering fluid, and air in the system from improper or incomplete bleeding. Now, for more power steering pump replacement tips and recommendations, there is a GM service bulletin, and that is number 0602320013B, which reinforces the above information. So what I want to do is I want to now take a look at that bulletin. Now, and you'll notice on the bulletin here that, guys, this is an August of 2009 bulletin. And again, diagnostic tips and recommendations when power steering pump replacement is necessary. Some of the things I want to point out here are very critical is it says a recently completed analysis of returned power steering pumps that have been replaced for noise, no power assist, no or low pressure, and leaking conditions has indicated a high number of no trouble found results. And it says this bulletin indicates that when attempting to repair power steering concern, the power steering system analyzer should be utilized to assist the technician in a successful diagnosis. And again, we'll talk about that pressure test using an analyzer here in just a few minutes. Now, it says, in addition, extensive warranty analysis has shown the following situations are all significant root causes of power steering pump failures. And it says improper pulley installation, reusing the O-rings, using fluid other than the OE specified steering fluid, and failure to flush the power steering system. So again, these are all identified right from General Motors as some root causes of some of the warranty issues they see with power steering pumps. And these are new power steering pumps here. Excuse me. Now, also, there's a little tip here that says, in order to improve customer satisfaction and reduce comebacks, GM recommends the following tips for replacing the power steering pump. It says, low or no pressure from the pump may be a result of a dirty or contaminated fluid, which could cause a pressure relief valve to stop functioning. Number 2, when removing the pulley, use the proper special tools, because pulley alignment is critical. Destroying the pulley may damage bearings on the new pump. Number 3, they tell us, be sure to use only the new O-rings included with the power steering pump. The new reservoir O-ring must be lubricated with the OE-specific power steering fluid prior to installation. And also make sure that the control valve O-ring is in its exact position here and not covering the pressure bypass hole. And we'll show you that here in just a few minutes as an example of some of the problems we've seen. And number 4 here from General Motors, they say bleed the power steering system according to the procedures and recommendations and service information. And there is some new power steering bleed procedures that we're going to talk about and show you here as we move through the course today. What I want to do now is I want to take a look at the warranty analysis breakdown of some of these issues. These are what we have seen. We did a recent field analysis of some returned power steering pumps. Now here you can see a total return summary of those 159 power steering pumps that we had pulled in. Again, these are our bulk power steering pumps pulled in. Now the chart shows the returns divided into percentages. For example here, 4% were returned for noise. Now that noise, we couldn't really identify the noise issue, but it was possibly due to incorrect bleeding. But again, not being able to identify that for sure, we'll take responsibility. Maybe there was an internal issue with the pump. 6% were returned for leaks. Now that could have been possibly due to improper pulley installation or maybe possibly contaminated fluid causing a seal issue. But again, we weren't able to positively identify the issue there. So again, we'll accept responsibility that maybe 6% of those leaks were a result of a product issue here. 5% were returned with a complaint of no pressure. Now, this could have been possibly due to sticky flow control valve because of a contaminated fluid. And again, we couldn't absolutely guarantee or identify that there was a sticky flow control valve, but if there was some contaminated fluid in there, in which there was in some cases, that it could have caused a binding or sticking flow control valve. We also confirmed some installer error. That amounts to 37%. Those are confirmed installer errors, such as not installing the pulley properly, using the wrong fluid, or not flushing it, and some things like that. We were able to confirm 37%. Now, 37% of them also were tested with no trouble found. In other words, we could not identify anything wrong with it. They were sent back, and we put them on the tester, and everything checked out okay. No leaks, no noise, pressures were okay, flow was okay. So again, 37% no problem found. Now the surprising part here was that 11% of those returns were not even an ACDelco pump that was returned to us, or it was the old core unit. So out of the 159 units, again, 11% wasn't even one of our pumps, or it was the original core returned to us. So again, this is what we've done in a recent warranty analysis. And we do this warranty analysis to try to identify some potential issues with our products here. And we identify those issues, we address those issues, and try to make product improvements. All right, now to help cut down on the number of warranty issues here, be sure to follow these critical steps when replacing the power steering pumps. First, we want to thoroughly flush the system with power steering fluid. Now guys, keep in mind, it may take several quarts of fluid to properly flush the system. I've heard up to 4 quarts in some cases. Again, 1 quart of fluid typically will not be enough fluid to properly flush the system. Again, we want to get all the old fluid, the old contaminants out of the system here. Next, remove the power steering pulley using the proper tools. Once we have removed the pulley, we can discard the old O-rings, and then we're going to replace them with the new O-rings that come with all of our new pumps. Then, we're going to install the pulley using the correct tools and check for proper alignment of the pulley. Again, we're going to put the new pulley on, or the pulley on our new pump, making sure we're using the correct tools. Matter of fact, the tools are included with our power steering pumps from ACDelco. Then we need to make sure that we use the recommended power steering fluid here. And then finally, we're going to bleed the system following the proper bleeding procedures. So what I want to do now is I want to take a look at some of the special tools that we'll need to replace power steering pumps here. When we're making that replacement procedure, what are some of those special tools? And while it's important to flush the system before replacing the pump, it's also important to properly bleed the system after the repairs are completed. Now, bleeding is a critical procedure after making a repair to prevent noise, as bleeding purges any of the air that may be trapped in the power steering system. Also, bleeding the system can help avoid pump damage from cavitation here. Again, so we want to flush the system out before we replace our pump or our gearbox, but after we're done, we want to make sure we bleed it properly, get all the air out of it. Now, there's a new recommended procedure on bleeding the power steering system. And with this new procedure, we'll need to use these recommended tools here. First, we'll need to use a MightyVac hand vacuum pump or equivalent. Again, we use a MightyVac, but again, whatever you have out there works fine, a hand vacuum pump. Now, another tool we're going to need is the J43-485 reservoir adapter that's used on General Motors vehicles. Now, Chrysler has a different part number adapter, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But what we're going to be doing here, guys, is we're putting a vacuum on the system here. We're going to draw all the air out, similar to bleeding our brakes here, bleeding a hydraulic clutch system. Now, for additional information on the new bleeding procedure using the proper tools, there's a GM bulletin out there, and that is bulletin number 080232004B. We're going to review that here in just a moment. And there's also a Chrysler Bulletin out there, and that's number 19-008-05. Now, again, and we're going to address it in the GM Bulletin, but if you don't have the adapter out there, in some cases you can use a rubber stopper and a brass fitting to attach a vacuum hose to the MightyVac here and put a vacuum on the system. And again, Chrysler has a part number for their adapter, which is actually a little screw-on or twist-on adapter as well there. All right. When we service a vehicle for power steering complaint, we want to make sure we are using the correct procedure here for bleeding. Again, guys, this is the new recommended procedure. Works on almost all GM vehicles. Chrysler recommends it, Ford recommends it, most all your manufacturers recommend this bleeding procedure here. And you'll find out that they are very similar. Little differences in some parts of it, but for the most part, the bleeding procedure are very, very similar here, using some of the same tools and the same type procedure. Now, this bulletin applies to the 2006, 2009 Chevy Impala, the Malibu, the G6, and others. And we're going to go through each one of these steps from the new bleeding procedure using the special tools discussed earlier here. Now, we're going to use the 2005 Chevy HT2500 pickup as an example, but I want to go ahead and address this on the bulletin first and walk through the steps of the bulletin. Now, it says some customers may comment on any whine or growl noise coming from the power steering. And the real important here, the correction is do not replace the power steering pump or the rack or gearbox here. They tell us to fill and bleed the power steering system using the following procedures. They want you to start off by using the MightyVac, the J42-485 that we just mentioned. Again, you know, MightyVac, any kind of a hand vacuum pump, doesn't matter here. It's an important note, though, that says maintain the fluid level throughout the bleed procedure. They want us to fill the reservoir to the full cold level. We're going to leave the cap off, obviously. We're going to raise the front wheels off the ground here. And then there's a picture here, and it's kind of hard to show the picture, but they want us to attach this J43-485 as an adapter to the J23-738 MightyVac, or our hand vacuum pump. And we're going to place this adapter on the pump reservoir filler neck. And we're going to apply a vacuum of 20-inch vacuum maximum. And again, we're putting this adapter on. We're going to apply a vacuum to our power steering reservoir here. And there's a note here that says if the J43-485 adapter is not available, an equivalent can be made using a rubber stopper and a brass fitting. I think it's a number 11 rubber stopper that you can find that will work. And it says an assistant is needed in the next step, and you'll see here why. What we're going to do is we're going to apply vacuum while turning the steering wheel lock to lock. Why we're going to maintain that 20-inch vacuum while turning. Now it says to use a clear line to allow you to see bubbles evacuating the system. And it tells you to stop when no more bubbles are seen. Again, you're going to be putting a vacuum on the system, and we should see bubbles coming up this hose here, kind of like bleeding our brakes. We're trying to pull all the air out of the system. And step number 5 tells us to wait 5 minutes. It says typical vacuum drop is 2 to 3 inch-pounds. Again, this is a typical vacuum drop that would be considered normal. And it tells us to verify the fluid level. If the fluid level is low, fill back up to the full line. It says reinstall the cap, start and idle the engine. Turn the engine off, verify the fluid level again. If the fluid level drops, add fluid, and repeat steps 4 and 5 until the fluid level stabilizes. So again, we're going to be putting vacuum back on the system, that 20 inches vacuum, looking for air bubbles until the fluid level stabilizes. Then when we're complete, it says to start and idle the engine. Turn the steering wheel 180 degrees in both directions 5 times. There's a note there, do not turn to the lock position. Then it says switch the ignition off, verify the fluid level, install the cap, the bleed procedure is complete. So again, guys, what we're doing here is we are essentially bleeding the system using a hand vacuum pump and this adapter and the hose. And again, this J-tool is available from Kent Moore. You can make one. I've seen several guys that have made one using, like I say, the rubber stopper. Chrysler has a special bleed tool out as well that we'll discuss here in a few minutes. But again, we're putting a vacuum in the system to bleed all the air out. And this is the latest and greatest in bleeding the system. Works much better than the old procedure of putting the vehicle up in the air and just turning the wheel back and forth and trying to bleed the air out that way. All right, now that we've walked through the steps on the Bulletin here, guys, let's take a look using the 2005 Chevy HD pickup here. Now, this bleeding procedure is just an example here. First of all, probably one of the most important things you can do here is make sure that none of the hoses come in contact with any of the parts on the vehicle. Now, hoses that touch the frame, the body, the chassis, the engine, or anything like that may cause system noise. It may be noise transmitted up through the vehicle. That may be a normal noise. Now, next, we want to verify that all the hose connections are tight. Obviously, we want to make sure nothing leaking there. Hopefully, no air being drawn in. And then we're going to remove the pump reservoir cap. We're going to fill the pump reservoir with fluid up to the full cold level. Now, it's important to make sure we maintain that full level with clean, new power steering fluid throughout our complete bleeding procedure. And now we're going to attach a reservoir adapter to our Mighty Vac, or our hand vacuum pump here. And then we're going to place the reservoir adapter on or in the pump reservoir filler neck. And now we're going to apply vacuum, which is 20 inches vacuum maximum, and we're going to maintain that vacuum for 5 minutes. Again, remember, guys, we'd expect to see a 2 to 3 inch vacuum drop here. That would be normal. Anything more than that could indicate a possible problem, which we'll discuss here in just a few minutes. Now we're going to remove the reservoir adapter in the Mighty Vac, going to reinstall a pump reservoir cap and start the engine. We want to allow the engine to idle here. Then we're going to turn off the engine. Once the engine is turned off, verify the fluid level and repeat steps 1 through 13 until the fluid stabilizes. Again, we're going to make sure that the fluid level is stabilized. If it hasn't stabilized, it has dropped a little bit, we're going to complete that bleeding procedure all over again. And then we're going to start the engine and allow the engine to idle, and then turn the steering wheel 180 to 360 degrees in both directions 5 times. Again, making sure we don't turn the steering wheel all the way to the lock position in either direction. And finally, we're going to turn the ignition off, check our fluid level again. Fluid level is fine, then we're going to release the vehicle to the customer. And again, if it's not fine, we're going to have to go back and repeat those steps again until the fluid level has stabilized. Now, for additional information about excessive vacuum drop and for the Chrysler bleeding procedure, I want to take a look at the Chrysler Service Bulletin, and that is 1900805, and it addresses a bleeding procedure very, very similar to the GM procedure that we just looked at. And you'll see they have an adapter, the power steering cap there, the number there, and the vacuum pump. And again, a hand vacuum pump or equivalent. Again, we use a Mighty Vac, but again, any vacuum pump, hand vacuum pump is going to work fine. And it addresses the vehicles here. And you'll see it goes back to 2000 on most of the Chrysler vehicles, all the way up to current Chrysler vehicles. Now, as we go through here, you'll see there's a caution here. It says power steering fluid +4 or ATF +4 or equivalent is to be used in the power steering system. No other power steering or automatic transmission fluid to be used in the steering system. Damage may result if the proper power steering fluid is not used. So very important, again, guys. We're going to talk about power steering fluid here in just a moment. But again, Chrysler is addressing that again. Make sure we use the correct OE fluid. And as we get into the steps here, they show using the hand vacuum pump and the adapter. And again, we're putting a vacuum on the system. And we walk through this here. They put the vacuum on a little bit different, for I think 3 minutes instead of the 5 minutes. But again, we're putting vacuum on the system, trying to draw the air out here. And as you go down through the rest of the steps here, they say again, they say 20 to 25 inches of vacuum for 3 minutes. Slowly release the vacuum, remove the special tool, add fluid to the proper level if necessary, and repeat steps 1 through 4 again if needed until the fluid level no longer drops. So again, we're trying to make sure the fluid level stabilizes. And here it says start the engine and cycle the steering wheel lock to lock 3 times. So Chrysler says go ahead and cycle the wheel lock to lock, where we're saying on GM to cycle it 180 degrees in each direction here. So again, little differences, but very, very similar. And what I'd recommend here, guys, is again, depending on the vehicle you're working on, make sure you follow the proper service and information. Look for those bulletins and PIs for that vehicle again, because there are some subtle differences in different vehicle applications here. And at the very end, it says stop the engine and check for levels of all the connections. Make sure for leaks at all the connections. Check for any signs. Removal of the check reservoir level. Make sure there's no air in there. Again, guys, when we're looking for air, we're looking for bubbles and things like that. Bubbles, foamy fluid, that would indicate a presence of air. So again, those are the type of things we're looking for. Again, make sure the fluid level is up to the proper level and no contaminants in it, and we're good to go there. So you see, again, Chrysler Bulletin, very, very similar to the General Motors Bulletin. There's a Honda Bulletin out that addresses a similar item, similar type procedure. Ford has a procedure out there very, very similar. So again, you'll find this is a relatively new procedure, and I say new over the last several years, but a lot of times some of the guys are not aware of it. And again, we're trying to address this here. Make sure you do understand that this is the latest and greatest bleeding procedure, and it can help reduce some of the noise issues that's caused by aeration or cavitation from air in the system. What I want to talk about now is excessive vacuum drop. Now, when we were diagnosing this, we were bleeding the system. Remember, we were looking at the vacuum. We were trying to put 20 inches of vacuum in the system. We expect to see 2 to 3 inch vacuum drop. Well, now what we're going to do is we're going to diagnose excessive vacuum drop, and that's included in the GM bleeding procedure. So I want to go over the steps here of this new process. And first of all, what we're going to do is if the vacuum continues to drop, and that is more than that 2 to 3 inch vacuum, we're going to remove the pressure and return hoses from our power steering pump. We're going to install plugs into the pressure and return port, again, to make sure that they're plugged off. And then we're going to attach a reservoir adapter using the Mighty Vac or any kind of hand vacuum pump here. Next, we're going to place the reservoir adapter on or in the pump reservoir filler neck, just like we had a minute ago when we tried to bleed the system. And we're going to apply that 20 inches vacuum to the system again. Now, if the vacuum drops again, we're going to need to inspect the pump for leaks. But if the vacuum holds steady, it tells us that the leak is not in the pump itself. The leak is somewhere else in the system. We need to check other parts of our steering system, such as hose and gearbox and things like that. But what we're trying to do here, guys, is that when we do the bleed procedure, if we have a vacuum drop, the vacuum could be on the low side, the suction side, and we may not notice it as a leak, and it could be drawing air in here. But using the hand vacuum pump here in the vacuum gauge, it's going to go ahead and let us know if we have a vacuum leak here or a leak on the system here. Because if it's leaking vacuum, drawing the vacuum loss, then we're going to go ahead and have a pressure loss or a leak on the low side here, and that will draw air in the system, and we'll have noise issues. All right, next thing we're going to do here is we're going to do on this is we're going to check that fluid. Again, remember, make sure the fluid is free of bubbles and foam. Again, we don't want to see any aerated fluid in there. Now, if you see periodic bubbles, that may indicate loose connection somewhere, such as leaking O-rings, seals in the return or pressure hose. And we also need to make sure that the fluid is free from discoloration. Again, we want to make sure it's not contaminated, not excessively dark, doesn't look like it's got water or anything like that in it. Again, so doing a good visual observation here. Now, if an excessive vacuum drop persists, we're going to need to inspect the return hose clamps, all the hose O-rings, the gear cylinder O-rings, the reservoir to pump O-rings, and all those, inspect them and replace as necessary. Now, the process for bleeding and checking a Chrysler power steering system, again, that's very similar to that GM process, as they both use the Mighty Vac hand vacuum pump and a reservoir adapter here. Now, what I want to do before we go any further is I want to take a look at one more warranty issue that we see. That is, pump noise is one warranty issue that can easily be avoided by using the hand vacuum pump whenever we bleed the system. Now, keep in mind, guys, that the pump noise can be caused by trapped air in the system, or what we call cavitation. And this trapped air may actually be introduced on the return side and not show as a visible fluid leak. So again, going back a couple steps, talking about using that hand vacuum pump is going to help us diagnose possible leaks here on the low side here on the suction side of the system. Now again, the leak on the return side may be hard to isolate using the conventional bleeding and diagnostic procedures, but using that hand vacuum pump can help diagnose pump noise. For example, if the system loses vacuum during the bleeding process, there may be a leak somewhere on the return side or the suction side of the system that we wouldn't have noticed using the old bleeding procedure. So let's take a look at another common warranty issue that we do see. and that is contaminated fluid. Now, contaminated fluid affects the performance of the power steering pump. Now, approximately 74% of the returned ACDelco power steering pumps to the manufacturer are due to improper installation issues. And 3/4 of those return pumps are due to contaminated fluid. In other words, approximately half of the pumps returned are due to contaminated fluid. That flushing procedure is real important. Contaminated fluid can cause a flow control valve and pressure relief valve to bind inside of our pump body, and this affects the system operating pressure. Now, binding occurs because the clearance between the flow control valve to the pump body is extremely small, guys. Actually, it's only a 0.5 of an inch. Now, deterioration of the pump power steering hoses from the inside out can also cause the fluid to become extremely dark and contaminated as well, and cause control valve issues. Again, some of those pieces can come off the inside of our hoses, causing contamination of the system. Cause the little pieces can cause that flow control pressure relief valve to bind as well. Now, we want to keep in mind that under normal use, the power steering fluid may darken slightly, but it's not always an indication of contamination. Remember, power steering fluid can also varnish up and overheat, but still look okay. So again, guys, appearance can be misleading. What I want to do is I want to compare a couple examples of power steering fluid here on our next slide. Now, the fluid on the left is obviously contaminated. You can tell by this dark, thick, oily appearance when compared to the fluid on the right, which has a nice, clear, light appearance. Now, the fluid on the right appears to be uncontaminated, but remember that appearance can be misleading. Now, the fluid on the right, it could contain flush agents. It could be the incorrect power steering fluid, or it could have other contaminants that may not affect the look of the fluid, but could affect the system performance. So when we service power steering systems, we would expect the fluid to look like the example on the right. But again, guys, appearance, it can be misleading. One of the consequences of contaminated fluid is seal damage here. Now, seal damage can occur when the power steering fluid becomes contaminated with other fluids, such as engine oil, brake fluid, coolant, carb cleaner, brake clean, even that aftermarket flush agent. Now, this type of contamination can be a result of solvents used in the aftermarket flush agent or the maintenance flush. And again, we're going to talk about this here in just a moment. Power steering fluid can also become contaminated by fine medical particles, again, from damaged inside the pump that can damage the seals as well, resulting in pressure loss, pressure bypass, fluid leaks. And again, you can see the difference in the seals there. The seal on the left, obviously damaged. Now, when that seal is actually installed on the pump around the shaft, it may not look damaged, it may not be obvious, but when you pull the shaft or pull the seal, you can obviously see that it is damaged. Now, what I want to do is I want to take a look at some maintenance precautions here that has been put up from our automotive manufacturers. Now, it's important to consider that all of the maintenance precautions that are provided by an automotive manufacturer before servicing power steering system. For example, no major automotive manufacturer recommends any type of power steering fluids as a maintenance procedure. And as we just learned, guys, aftermarket power steering fluid flushes may contain solvents that can cause seals to leak, and it's not recommended procedure by most manufacturers. However, it is important to flush the system with the correct power steering fluid during any component replacement procedure, even if the fluid appears to look okay. And again, it's because the aftermarket flushing agent may be present in the fluid even though we can't see it. So again, guys, we're not saying don't flush it for doing our service procedure here, but we want to flush it using the correct OE fluid. We don't want to use any kind of an additive or aftermarket flush agent in here. Now, for additional information about unnecessary flushing procedures, we do want to refer to the GM Service Bulletin 040601-029E, and there's also a Honda Bulletin out there, and that is Honda Bulletin HSN 0206-07 that addresses the same thing about aftermarket maintenance flushes. As a matter of fact, Honda says it's taboo. So let's take a look at the GM Bulletin now. What I want to do now is let's take a look at that GM Bulletin, in that Bulletin 040601-029E, and it addresses unnecessary flushing services, additive recommendations, and proper utilization of the General Motors Simplified Maintenance Schedule to enhance customer service experience. And this is an April of 2010 bulletin, and it applies to 2011 and all prior GM vehicle, cars, and trucks, including Saturn, Saab, and Hummer. So let's go ahead and take a look at what they're talking about here. And it says an overview of the proper service vehicle, the proper vehicle service, General Motors is aware that some companies are marketing tools and equipment to support a subsystem flushing procedures. These dedicated machines are in addition to many engine oil, cooling system, fuel system, AC, transmission flush, and steering system additives available to the customer. General Motors vehicles under normal usage do not require any additional procedures or additives beyond what is advised under the former vehicle maintenance schedules or the current simplified maintenance schedules. Do not confuse machines available from Kent Moore that are designed to aid and accelerate the process of fluid changing with these flushing machines. And it talks about engine crankcasing. It says that General Motors does not endorse or recommend engine crankcase flushing of any of its gasoline engines. Goes on to say that GM authorized service information detailed, descriptive, and complete. It says the specific vehicle model or powertrain need is identified. GM will issue an authorized service document containing a procedure and, if required, make available or require specific use of a machine, tool, or chemical to accomplish proper vehicle servicing. An example of this is fuel injector cleaning. And due to a variation of fuel quality in different areas of the country, GM has recognized the need for fuel injector cleaning methods on some engines. And it says, though, under normal circumstances, this service is not part of the maintenance requirements. And what it's doing is going on to address that if you don't, if General Motors does not recommend flushing or have a tool or a procedure out there, they don't want to see a system flushing done here. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't flush a system with OE fluid, but we're talking about a maintenance flush. They don't want us to put in an additive in the system here, particularly a power steering system, our transmission system, engine system, like that. Putting any kind of additive in there, flushing the system out, and releasing it to the vehicles, not as a maintenance. Again, this additives, the flushing procedures is not needed. And as a matter of fact, they're concerned that the additives in these flushing solvents can cause issues with seals, gaskets, and some things like that, and cause premature failure. And it talks about that here. And again, this bulletin is very important to follow along and to understand. And so again, I guess what I'm trying to get, the point I'm trying to get across here is that if a vehicle comes in and it's had a power steering flush, maybe at another shop, we want to make sure we get all of that old fluid out of there, all the old solvent out of there, and we don't know what may have happened at this point. Has it damaged some seals or gaskets or contaminated the fluid? And as we've discussed, how important fluid contamination is here. So again, not recommending any kind of additive or any kind of a flushing procedure other than the typical flush of OE fluid when they're doing a repair procedure such as replacing the pump or the gearbox. Hope that clears that up, guys, and you'll find out that Honda has a bulletin and Chrysler, they all address similar issues with similar bulletins as well. All right, guys, now with that, let's take a look at some power steering fluid. With so many choices, which type or brand of power steering fluid is the right one to use? Well, the answer is it depends. While all power steering fluids are comparable for the right application, no one fluid is right for all applications. And this is because power steering fluid specifications vary by manufacturer. Chrysler now recommends using the ATF Plus 4 in most vehicles, while Ford recommends only the Mercon R multipurpose ATF XT2 fluid. And most GM vehicles recommend using only the GM power steering fluid, GM part number 8902-21-184, or the ACDelco equivalent. And again, they come in different sizes, they can pints and quarts, but again, make sure we're using the correct OE fluid here. Now, Honda uses a synthetic fluid, part number 08206-9002, and it claims that if the wrong fluid is used, that the system will be noisy, and it may fail within just a few days here, guys. So again, Honda recommends the synthetic fluid here, and they got their own specific part number. Now, the point here, guys, is to reduce comebacks and warranty issues, use only the recommended original equipment power steering fluid, not a power steering fluid that says compatible with all systems. All right, one other item I want to mention here, that when we service power steering systems, there are several manufacturers' concerns to keep in mind. And one of them, for example, is that General Motors does not recommend using any kind of an inline filter on our power steering systems. Now, I know some of our Cadillacs do have an inline filter that is OE equipped, and that's fine. But we do not want to install any kind of an aftermarket inline filter on our power steering systems for GM vehicles at this point. And we've talked with engineering about this, and again, it's completely no filters at this point. All right, well, let's go ahead and wrap up module number 2 here. In this module, we started by discussing the typical warranty issues and specific service bulletins to assist with these issues. Then we introduced critical pump replacement steps using proper tools and new replacement procedures, including tips on how to deal with pump noise, contaminated fluid, and aftermarket maintenance precautions.